audio recordings, but I don't have any video recordings. So, does anybody want to ask any questions, or you just want me to talk, or both? Because I'm happy to answer. I do things in reverse. I answer questions in the beginning, because it usually takes so long to answer the questions. There's never enough time in the end. So I like to ask people if they have any questions. And I think we're going to be speaking about Japa. Is that correct? So if you have any questions about Japa, then yes. Why is it so important? Well, I guess the question also is, well, why not just kirtan? Because kirtan's the religion of the age, but then we don't make a vow when we get initiated. We don't make a vow to do kirtan. We make a vow to chant Japa. And the reason is because it's a regulated practice. It's a personal regulated practice. With kirtan, you need other people. So, and if you do kirtan alone, it's almost like Japa. So you can't regulate that practice. So it's the tradition. It's always been the tradition that Vaishnavas have always chanted a certain number of rounds and counted them on beads. Even Lord Chaitanya had beads, or sometimes he would count on his fingers. Because when Mahaprabhu was traveling, they said, well, you should take a servant, and that way you could have a hand free to chant and count on your beads. So he was even doing it. But so it's always been the tradition. And it's kind of like, it's like an agreement that we make with Krishna that I will be there for you every day for a few hours. And so, in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Prabhupada said, of all the instructions given by the spiritual master, the instruction to chant 16 rounds is the most important. So I was at a home of some devotees in Delhi, and they were doing elaborate deity worship every morning, maybe a couple hours. And he said he wasn't chanting his rounds in the morning, not all of them. And he'd have to chant while he was driving, and he would be distracted. And I said, well, I think it's really important that you chant your rounds and minimize your deity worship. And then I went back to Mayapur, because I live in Mayapur, and I told Jananivas, I said, this is what I said, is that the right thing? And he said, yes, because when you're initiated, you didn't take a vow to do deity worship. You took a vow to chant 16 rounds. And Prabhupada has written, this is of all his instructions, this is the most important. And then in our scriptures it says that all the 9 processes of devotional service are contained within chanting Hare Krishna. So this regulated, it's a regulated discipline. It's a personal practice, and kirtan is a group practice. So they feed off one another. But the personal practice is the practice that you vow to follow when you're initiated. So of course, kirtanya sadhari, you should always do kirtan, but that's a tradition. And of course the tradition also has been 64 rounds. We only chant 16 if we're initiated or we live in a temple, but the tradition was 64. So we got off light, and still we complain. It's like you go to the store, it's half price and you're complaining. Why is it so expensive? No, it's on sale. No, it's too much. So devotees complained to Prabhupada also. Can't you make it easier? And Prabhupada would just laugh. He said, it's already been made easy. From his perspective. From our perspective, it's difficult. His perspective, it's not 64 rounds. It's only 16. So Japa is it's our personal practice. It's our private time with Krishna. And that commitment we make. Satchidananda Swami says it's like an appointment. You have an appointment and you'll show up. So he said that every day you show up for your 16 rounds. It's like a rendezvous with Krishna. So I know some devotees have more of a difficult time with japa than with kirtan. But if you actually apply yourself and get into it, you'll see it's very much like this, personal. It's very personal. What I find, I'll just say personally, what I find that the kirtan is very powerful. It's a very powerful and uplifting and purifying event. It gives you like this surcharge of energy, and so much bhakti comes. But I find that in the japa, different things happen than in the kirtan. It's a little more internal. We do japa workshops, and in some of the workshops we do 64 rounds, and after the 64 round day, inevitably some devotee the next morning will ask a question, and I was chanting, and all these impurities have come up, and I'm feeling really depressed. So that's you don't usually feel that in kirtan. I just had this kirtan, you say it was ecstatic kirtan. That kirtan, so much stuff came up in that kirtan, I'm going crazy. That more happens with japa. This kirtan is very uplifting, it's very energizing. So it's the same mantra but taken in a different way, and it has a different function. And it's more a little more internal, prayerful, and personal and private. Whereas the group you get carried by the energy. With japa, if you don't have the energy, you don't get carried. So it really reveals where you're at. When you're in the kirtan, you get lost with the group, right? Which is why we do kirtan, because it takes us beyond our own power. But with japa, it's not beyond your own power. So then it's good. It's an evaluation, right? Where am I at in my spiritual life? So, Ayendra used to say, one feeds the other. Japa feeds the kirtan, kirtan feeds the japa. But when you think about it, it's quite interesting. If it's Harinam is the religion of the age, Hari Bol, Jai, my Mayapur buddy. My Mayapur buddy has arrived. So when you it's very interesting, that when you get initiated, you're not making any vows to do anything. I mean, you're making vows to not do things, but you're only making a vow to do one thing. Just chant your rounds. You're not making a vow to get up early. You're not making a vow to go to kirtan, to go to a program, to go to Mangalarti. Yeah, it's interesting. That was the only vow Prabhupada asked us to make. No, not that you don't do the other things, but to actually make a promise. That's the only thing you promise. So obviously it's pretty important. But you don't even, it's not like, and do kirtan a half-hour a day and at least do one artik a day. None of that. Interesting, isn't it? I think you have to clear the doorway. Unless you like devotees' feet, because they'll kick you on the way in. Benedictus or something. Blessed. So a lot of what a lot of devotees say is that kirtan is social and japa is private, individual. So the kirtan you get uplifted by the environment. We had kirtan male in Mayapur, like 2,500 devotees. It's like amazing. You can be in total ignorance and total illusion and total whatever, and just walk into that temple with 2,500 people and just keep your body in there long enough and you'll be completely Krishna conscious. It's not so easy with japa, because it's just you and your little thing up here. That mind that can get in the way. So it's really, you really have to deal with that in japa. So it takes more effort. But if you do it, it's very powerful, because my experience with japa is that if you're very absorbed in chanting and you're doing it on a regular basis, it becomes like a conversation. Like you're giving your heart to Krishna, you're revealing your heart, and Krishna is speaking to you. But you have to be very open for that. You have to be very focused. You can't be distracted. You can't be just mouthing the words. But if you're very much in the mood of offering your heart to Krishna and feeling the sound vibration and listening, then you can hear Krishna talking, and it's just like this conversation goes on. So it's very personal. I don't experience that as the same thing with kirtan. I experience something different, which is also necessary. Like you have to drink water, and you have to eat, and you have to exercise, but you have to breathe. Of all four, breathing is the most important, because if you don't breathe, you can't do anything else. But for us, japa is like our breath. It's the foundation. And one thing you notice is if you do it well, your spiritual life becomes energized. Because if you do it well on a steady basis, it's very, very powerful. At least that's what I've noticed. One time, a devotee wrote a letter to Prabhupada, and he was having a lot of trouble, and Prabhupada said, he didn't ask any questions, he just said, you're committing offenses to the Holy Name. That was his answer, just right off. It's like, you know, you go to the doctor and you say, the eyes are red, the nose is running, the ears are aching, there's a flu going around, you have the flu. So the Prabhupada was just analyzed it. You're committing offenses. By the list of problems this devotee was having, Prabhupada said, you're making offenses. So that's my personal experience, that a lot of the difficulties we have in spiritual life are just due to our conditioning. It's just who we are as conditioned souls. And if we're chanting well, we overcome that conditioning. And when we're not chanting well, then we battle with it. And then we have a lot of troubles. Because the troubles are coming from our past conditioning. They're not coming from our bhakti, right? It's coming from the conditioning. But if there's not a lot of bhakti, then you tend to deal with the conditioning. And the conditioning are all those things that have kept us separate from Krishna, and they continue to keep us separate from Krishna. So I would say, for many, many devotees, japa is a huge challenge. For some, just to chant any number of rounds is a challenge, and for those who chant 16 rounds, to actually be absorbed is a challenge, and to do it every day, and then to be absorbed every day. And one of the biggest challenges is to find the time to do it, right? Because if you're not really into it, it's harder to find the time. So, but you can't really avoid it because it was the main thing Prabhupada gave us. So you have to learn, you know, if you want to be a Hare Krishna and really get into it at some point in your life, you have to figure out how to do it because that's the main practice. You can't really avoid it. And then you have to figure out how to make the time. And then the other thing that's really interesting is I ask devotees sometimes when I do my japa workshops, I ask them, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the lowest, 10 being the highest, how much priority do you give to your japa in your day? And so some devotees will say, well, I don't give a lot of priority. But other devotees will say, well, it's the first thing I do. I give a lot of priority. And then I challenge them. I say, okay, you give it priority. That means it's the first thing you do in your day. But what are you thinking about when you're chanting? Are you thinking about what you have to do in the day? And they often say yes. Then I'll say, then it's not your first priority. That even though externally it is, internally it isn't. Because you're now already ahead in your day. So your priority is your day, even though you're chanting, right? Because your mind is in your day. So you not only have to give it priority externally in terms of where you do it and how you do it, but you have to give it priority internally. So you're not doing something else. Because oftentimes we're doing something else. And oftentimes we're doing something else because we don't like chanting. We don't have a taste. So we take a little vacation. Because chanting is painful, I'll take a vacation. That's unfortunate. It's really unfortunate. There's so much nectar in the holy name. So it's unfortunate not to be absorbed. Of course, that's what Mahaprabhu said. That's my misfortune. I'm not attracted, so that's my misfortune. So if something's attractive and we're not attracted, that's our misfortune. Like my daughter, she never liked chocolate. In fact, she's so unfortunate. She doesn't like chocolate. As of last year, she started to like chocolate. She never liked chocolate. Well, it's not bad if you're a devotee and not like chocolate. But if you think chocolate is something wonderful, then you think she's so unfortunate. She's missing one of the greatest pleasures of life. Chocolate. She doesn't like chocolate. Take her to the doctor, make her like chocolate. She's missing out on life. But it's like that, where so many devotees are not relishing chanting japa. It's like they're missing out. They don't realize what's there. Satyanandan Swami, he had a realization. He went to Govardhan and then he just did like a nam bhajan, just chanting all day. At one point in his life, he wanted to just get into chanting. And so he really made an effort. And, you imagine chanting all day, every day. After a while, you're bound to get into it. And you're in Govardhan, so it's very powerful. So he said at a certain point, he got into it more than he ever got into it before. I think the door's locked. He was having realizations he never had before in chanting. You can imagine if that's all you're doing. At a certain point, It's like the holy name's going to open up. So he said the holy name was opening up to him. And he was getting a lot of realization, and he was getting a lot of taste. And also just the experience was different than his normal 16 rounds. Sometimes we chant, we don't have much experience. The experience is, the only experience is, I want to get it finished. That's the that's the experience is, let's get it over with. Right? That's, my experience. Or just boredom. So he was having a different experience chanting, and it was unlike any experience he ever had in his life. And he started reflecting, and he realized that the name was now manifesting to him. It was starting to blossom. It was like he was feeling that the name hadn't really revealed itself to him in all those years. He'd been a devotee for years, and now because of this Nam Yajna, the name was starting to blossom. It's like a flower, and all of a sudden it blossoms. And wow, that flower is beautiful. I never knew it was such a beautiful flower. So it's like the holy name blossomed into something different. And he said, I'd never experienced chanting like this. And he started questioning, and he said, I wonder if I was actually chanting the Mahamantra before. And I wonder if I was really chanting, because this name I'm chanting now is different than that name. So it's very interesting, because that's our philosophy, because Krishna is revealing himself more and more and more. And the philosophy is that chanting Nama Parad, Krishna's not really present there. But Krishna begins to manifest when we're in the offenseless stage, and in the Shuddha Nam, he's fully manifest. So we always say Krishna and his name are the same, right? How many times have you heard that? 3,876, at least. If you've been a devotee at least a week, you've heard it that many times, right? And when we chant, how much experience do we have that Krishna and his name are the same? Well, it takes time. As you advance, you get a little more, a little more. But you can understand, Satchidananda Swami was getting a lot of experience, that Krishna was in his name. And it was just kind of hitting him, that Krishna is actually here, but because I wasn't chanting properly, I wasn't realizing that. I wasn't having that experience. So it's unfortunate if we don't get that experience when we're chanting. It's unfortunate if we're chanting just to get our rounds done. And the problem is it's a vicious cycle, because if you're chanting just to get your rounds done, you won't get that experience. Because why would Krishna give anyone an experience of his name if the only goal in chanting his name is to stop chanting when you finish? So Krishna's saying, well, I guess you don't like to chant, and you don't think this chanting is very nice, so I'll reciprocate with that mood, and I'll make it painfully difficult for you to chant. Because Krishna's really good at reciprocation, right? But if actually you make an effort, then he'll reciprocate. And Krishna, let me taste something, let me get into it. And he'll reciprocate. He wants us to taste it. And I was realizing something very interesting. That we've heard through our teachings that Krishna and his name are the same. And we've heard that when advanced devotees say Krishna, it's not a sound. They actually see Krishna. They see Krishna. The sound and the form are not two different things. We think, I'm chanting Hare Krishna. But it would be nice to see Krishna. But we are seeing Krishna. The pure devotee sees Krishna when he chants. Right? Krishna is there in his name. So, at least that's a philosophy, theoretically. Right? But we read in scripture, a pure devotee, when he says Krishna, the form is there. He sees it. And the Leela. So, oftentimes we say things like, I have 4 rounds left to chant. Or I have to chant my rounds. Or I have to finish my rounds. I'm behind on my rounds, I have to finish them. Like we use this word, I have to, right? Now, I was thinking about it one day, and I was thinking, why do we not get a taste for chanting? And if we say Krishna and his name are the same, and you say, I have to chant, basically you're saying, I have to associate. Sorry, Prabhu, I can't spend time with you, I have to be with Krishna. Which obviously, if you had a date with Krishna, you wouldn't say, I have to go out with Krishna. You'd say, I'm going out with Krishna. I get to go out. Right? So then I was thinking, it's interesting because we tend to deal with the holy name as not Krishna, just as like it's a practice, and that's the problem. It's not a practice, it's Krishna. But if you deal with it as a practice, it just becomes like a ritual. Oh, I have 16 rounds, it's a ritual. It's my devotional practice. But it's not your devotional practice, it's your association with Krishna. So now, if you say, I have to do a practice, like I have to practice my violin. Is there a violin there? Someone? Whose violin is that? Dameshwari's. Dameshwari? Who's Dameshwari? How old is she? 6. Dameshwari, do you like practicing your violin? Or does your mother have to make you practice? Both? A little of both? My daughter played violin. It was like the battlefield of Kurukshetra doing practice. She didn't like it. I'm a musician. I'm like, why are you playing an instrument if you and your mother just fight over the practice all the time? Didn't make sense to me. But anyway, if you look at chanting like that, it's like, oh, it's my practice. This is what I do. It's like just I practice it for a period of time, and then most kids they don't like to practice. So I tell my daughter, I said, okay, you practice. We had a piano in our house. I said, you want to jam? No, I'm finished practicing. It's like there's no. This is practice. It's just a practice. It's what it is. So if you look at japa as a practice, then it's, well, where's Krishna? It's like you've eliminated Krishna. So then we use this language, I have to chant. But we wouldn't use the language, I have to spend time with Krishna. But that's what we're saying. So now we're telling the holy name, I have to chant, which means I really rather watch television. I really rather do my email or call my friend or check out go on Facebook. But I have to chant. So now, if I wanted, how should I say this? Well, the best example is the husband and wife, because this is typical. So, the husband, on Saturday, his friends invite him to do something he really likes to do, whatever that may be. Right, go to the game, or use an example of ordinary people. Go to the game, the football game, or play golf, or something. But he's already committed to be with his family. So today's Saturday, the family's going out somewhere to do something with the kids, right? And so he gets a phone call, and his friends say, hey, you want to go to the game? We have an extra ticket, so-and-so's sick. And it's like a really big game. And he's really excited. But he says, I'd love to go, but I have to go out with the family. And his wife's in the next room and she hears the phone call. So what does that communicate to the wife? It communicates that I'd rather be with the boys, but I'm out of duty going with the family, but I really don't want to. I have to. So the wife's not very happy when the husband says that, right? Right, wives? You're not happy when your husband says, I have to go. Do I have to go out with you guys? Do you really need me to go? She's not happy. She wants you to say, Saturday we're going out together, I can't wait. That's what she wants you to say. So if the guys are smart, even if they want to go to the game, they'll say, I can't wait to go out with you. If the guys aren't smart, they'll say, do I have to go with you? Because my friends just called the game. And then they get in trouble, and then they have to go out and buy flowers to make up after the big fight. So, but the point is, if you're telling the holy name I have to chant, then because the holy name's a person, then how can we expect to get a nice taste for it? Because the holy name's going to reciprocate. Because Krishna just reciprocates, right? This is however we're thinking. He just reciprocates it. So have to chant. So Krishna says, well, you think I'm that bad? My holy name's so bad that it's like, you have to do it. It's like, you really don't want to. So the holy name reciprocates with that move. And then you're chanting, and it's quite boring. It just becomes a task. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. It's not relishable. So the holy name will reciprocate, but we have to change our attitude. Right? So we don't want I have to chant attitude because the holy name will reciprocate. So we want to enter with a positive attitude and think, I'm fortunate. Are we fortunate to have the holy name? Yes, we're very fortunate. There's millions of people in this country and billions of people around the world and very few have the holy name. I joke with devotees. I say, can you imagine you woke up one day and you couldn't chant? You could talk, but when it came time to chant Hare Krishna, you couldn't do it. You know, say, hi, how you doing? I'm going to have to chant my rounds. You couldn't do it. You would go crazy, right? You know? You could say anything, but you couldn't chant your rounds. Your mouth wouldn't make it. So, you know, it would be the most painful, terrifying experience, wouldn't it? I can't chant Hare Krishna. But so often, it's like we deal with the holy name like we take it for granted. But I gave that example in one retreat, and a devotee came up to me. He said, actually, that happened to me. He said, I woke up one day and I was paralyzed and I couldn't speak, so I couldn't chant. It actually happened to him. So, you know, you kind of take it for granted, but what if you couldn't chant? And then you would think, wow, this is horrible. It's the worst thing that's ever happened to me. So we want to learn to appreciate the holy name. So what I teach devotees to do, and devotees have told me that this has helped them tremendously, it's rephrasing the I have to chant and rephrase it. Even if you feel I have to, rephrase it to I get to chant. Prabhu, I have 4 rounds left to chant. I'm sorry I can't spend time with you. I'm going on a walk. I get to chant. I'm really excited. It's 11 o'clock at night. I have 4 rounds left. I'm really excited. I can't wait. It's going to be nectar. Because a lot of times the experience you get from anything is just the attitude you bring into it. We have this phenomenon in ISKCON. I don't know if it still goes on. But you have these brahmacharis, right? And they get married, but they don't transition into grihastas. They remain brahmacharis. They just have a wife now. You know, and the wife's like, by the way, did you know you're married? Because you're like still thinking like a brahmachari. You know, so it doesn't work. Because how should we say? They haven't they're still kind of in the brahmachari ashram. They haven't landed in grihasta. So they're still thinking a bit like brahmacharis. You know, they haven't realized that there's responsibilities and there's attitudes that are different in grihastha life, and they haven't realized yet that women aren't actually the same as men, so they kind of treat their wife like a brahmachari. Hey, Prabhu, what's up? You know, sometimes, it's so funny, sometimes I'm with my friends and we joke, right? So, you know, sometimes the joking is a little sarcastic amongst men, you know? Like, we have a joke in America. If you want to joke with somebody, you know, somebody comes to your house and you go, hey, look what the cat brought in. You know, it's just like kind of joking with them. So men will do those kinds of offensive things. Hey, look what the cat brought in. Like, look who showed up in my house, you know? So, you know, sometimes I wouldn't do those things, but I would joke with my friends and my wife would say, how could you say those things? That's offensive. And I know, this is how guys do it. Because if women did that, they'd be crying. You know? They hate one another. They wouldn't talk with one another for like 10 years. So sometimes, you know, the brahmachari is like he hasn't made the transition yet. From to grihastha, and he's still treating the woman like she's a man, and he's, you know, just like he hasn't. So it's like it can happen in the same way when we're chanting. You know, we have to transition the attitude. So the attitude is not I don't want to chant, I like to chant, I have rounds left. This is a torture. This is a yajna. No, it's I get to, I like it. There's a transition, and when you transition, then your attitude brings in reciprocation. No, actually what I wanted to say was, in traditional old days of ISKCON, I grew up in the early days of ISKCON when nobody knew anything, but everybody thought they knew everything. So we did a lot of crazy things. And so what would happen is, when a brahmachari, you know, in those days, like getting married was like, it was like one step before dying. I mean, you know, cancer, getting married, getting a car accident, you know, it was all kind of like, you know, and, you know, dying were pretty equal. You know? So, because in those days the mood was, well, everyone, you know, all the men should remain brahmachari, because if you don't remain brahmachari, your life's pretty much finished. You know, you're in the deep, dark well, and, you know, once you get in the well, Nobody ever gets out because it's right there in the Bhagavatam. So that's what the sannyasis were preaching in 1972. So all the brahmacharis were eating it up. This is great. All the women were in the back of the temple crying because they thought there's going to be no men to marry, because the sannyasis are preaching that household life is a deep, dark well. Right? So there was this like heavy programming against getting married. It was very strong. Very strong. Right? Anyone around ISKCON in those days that knows about it? What it was like. Yeah. It's crazy, actually. So then what would happen is these men would get married with these, they finally like on their last leg where they just like couldn't make it as a brahmachari for like 3 more seconds, then they'd say, they'd throw in the towel and say, okay, I'm going to get married. And all the brahmacharis said, oh my God, how are you doing this? This is horrible. And so now they're ending grihastha life, and they have this completely negative attitude about grihastha life. I failed, this is horrible. My wife is just a witch. She's a witch in the day or a jackal at night. The kids are thieves. All these. And they enter the happy wedding day. They enter with that mentality. What am I getting myself into? This is like, worse than death. And so the whole point is, when you enter into household life with that mood, what happens? You could be perfectly compatible, everything could be perfect, but because he has that mood, he thinks, this is horrible, everything becomes horrible. Right? And he blames his wife, it's all your fault. You're too beautiful, not in Maya, it's all your fault. You should be ugly. Make yourself ugly, you're too attractive. Just crazy things. So the point is, the same way you approach the holy name. You think this is going to be difficult, I don't like it, it's hard. But that's how it reciprocates. You had a question? Comment?
You answered it. I was like, being smart with Krishna, or the principle of the husband being a smart husband and being smart with Krishna, is it?
Yeah, it's attitude. It's attitude. Because Krishna's all about your attitude. It's not about what you do. It's about what's in your heart and what you think. And so even you don't have the right attitude, you want to have the right attitude. You want to have a respectful attitude, appreciative attitude. Thank you, Krishna, for giving me the holy name. One of the things I teach in my workshop is by the way, the workshop is June 14th, 15th, 16th, Bhaktivedanta Manor. 7 to 9 on Friday, 10 to 5:30 on Saturday, and 10 to 5 on Saturday. They used to say in America, be there or be square. It means square means you're not cool. So be there or be square. Because if you're cool, you're round. Anyway, so what was I just saying? I forgot.
Do you normally do class the manner?
Oh yeah, well, when I do Japa workshop, I said saying something I do in the Japa workshop. And what was the sentence before that? Anyone remember? Speaker can't remember. The audience can't remember. What's the hope? Trying to remember the point I was making.
Attitude, what's in your heart.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So one of the things that I like to do in workshops is appreciation exercises and reflect on what do you appreciate about the holy name, and then to see the holy name as Krishna's love and affection. This is how Krishna shows affection to us, because by giving us the holy name, we can develop a relationship, and so Krishna's offering himself in a relationship through the holy name. This is how he gives himself to the devotees. He said, if you want me, I'm available in my name. I will give myself to you through my name. And through that name, we can have a relationship. So then if we approach the holy name in that appreciation of Krishna, he's so kind. I am not qualified in any way, but he gives me his holy name, and because I have his holy name, I can actually develop genuine affection and love. So then I appreciate that. And so a lot of times the devotees say, well, you know, when I chant, I don't feel anything. It's just kind of, and I'm not feeling anything. Just kind of humming, right? We've all experienced that. The only thing I'm feeling is I would like this to end. That's the feeling, right? Isn't that the feeling? And so and so I tell devotees, but when you're not feeling anything, sometimes all you have to do is just appreciate that you have the holy name, and you will feel something. You'll feel grateful, even if you're not relishing chanting, but you'll at least feel grateful that you have the holy name. And so it's such a positive emotion that Krishna reciprocates. That's what we're talking about. Krishna's reciprocating with our attitude, right? And that's what bhakti's about, right? It's all about the attitude. Because a good attitude, 16 rounds, is better than a bad attitude of 100 rounds. You know this story. I don't know if you know the story. It's really interesting. These devotees had left Krishna consciousness, not entirely, and they formed their own community, but they weren't following all the principles. But they were still doing kirtan. I don't know if they were chanting 60 rounds, but they were chanting. And so one of the leaders of the movement, he was trying to help them, correct them. And they were saying, well, should we stop chanting just because we're taking drugs and not following what I call the fourth regulative principle, the tough principle, the one that's really hard to follow. They weren't following that one either. They were breaking the two principles. The two principles are easy to follow and two are difficult. They were not following the two difficult ones. So they said, so should we just stop chanting because we're not following those principles? So that leader went back to Prabhupada and gave him the argument. He said, well, Prabhupada, they're not practicing celibacy, and they're taking drugs, but they said, well, at least we're chanting. And Prabhupada said, well, maybe in 100 lifetimes, the chanting will take effect. Because they're offending Krishna by not following their spiritual master. So it's not that you just chant and it's good enough. Krishna's just there. But Krishna's reciprocating with who you are, your attitude, your life, and so forth. So knowing that, like you say, be smart, be a smart husband. Knowing that Krishna will reciprocate with your attitude, just have the right attitude. And then the holy name will start to appear to you in different ways, and it becomes very sweet. I mean, all of us would like to have sweet experiences with the holy name every day, wouldn't we? Because that will insulate us from so many problems. And that's why Mahaprabhu said, I commit offenses, I have no taste, therefore I am Durdaivam, I'm unfortunate. So who creates our misfortune? Who's responsible for our misfortune? We are. If somebody gives you an opportunity, gives you great fortune, you don't take it, then you're responsible for your misfortune. So that's what Mahaprabhu was saying. I commit offenses, and I don't have a taste for chanting, so I'm unfortunate. Taking responsibility. I'm unfortunate. Right? Any other questions? Yes?
Just about your insight into Sankirtan and Harinama public chanting the holy name, because that's more extrovert.
Right. These are more personal. Yeah.
There appears to be a lot of presence around Kirtan and Japa, but what about
outside? So you have Kirtan inside, Japa inside, and then public. The position of Sankirtan in terms of our own need to do it, or the need for the movement?
Yeah, looking at it, there's a lot of presence around Kirtan, plus there's what
Taking it outside, yeah.
There appears to be a decline.
Oh, in the movement there's a decline. I had a nice experience in Mayapur this year. One of my godbrothers from Los Angeles, he's probably like 5 years younger than me. I don't know if he's a godbrother, I think he is, but he's been a devotee a long time. And I saw him in Mayapur after so many years, and I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm taking out a Harinam party every day in Los Angeles. He said, this is like the first time it's gone out every day in like 35 years. And he was so ecstatic, just so happy and so inspired. And he was feeling, I think he was feeling inspired because the people, where he was going, people were reciprocating. They actually like it. But one of the things I know when you give Krishna, it's always more powerful. So chanting the holy name, when it's done in service to others, where other people get it, it's actually more powerful. So that's a special benefit of chanting, going outside or at a festival or at a program where new people come and you do kirtan, and you get more benefit yourself because you're giving the holy name. That was like Thakur Haridas. He chanted 64 rounds silently, 64 rounds softly, and 64 rounds loudly. And the 64 rounds loudly were for other living entities. So the trees would hear. And, when Prabhupada was here at John Lennon's estate, one time, I don't know the story, maybe someone knows, Prabhupada had them chant to the roots of the trees. Chanting japas and chant to the trees will benefit. Or some devotees say, if you chant your japa loudly, the insects will hear it. The insects will benefit. And I just read a story, Japa Thakur told that when he was a young devotee, maybe he was in Montreal, he chanted so loudly, japa, that all the devotees went and complained to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, you go out in the park and chant. So if you like to chant loud, just chant outside in the park, all the trees, plants, they'll all benefit. As far as, but there's another story that our movement began with Sankirtan, with Harinam Sankirtan. That was the daily practice. When I joined, our schedule was, we'd have breakfast, we'd clean the temple, then 10:30 we would go out on Harinam Sankirtan. We'd come back for lunch, and then we go back again. It's like 5, 6 o'clock. And then 3 days a week, we'd have Bhagavad Gita class, and the other 3 days, aside from the Sunday feast, the other 3 days, we would go back out again in the evening. There's a lot of Sankirtan. That was what we did. And then, at that time, in 1970, I believe, or 71, or late 70, Prabhupada took a party of devotees to India. So you can see this video. I think Giriraj Swami talks about it. I think it's on the auto bars from Following Prabhupada. They ended up in Beirut. And all the devotees ever did was kirtan. So they were in the airport doing kirtan in Beirut, and these policemen had guns at them because they didn't know what they were going to do. And Giriraj Swami's chanting, and the devotees are like, I think you should stop chanting. They have guns at you. The point is, that's all we ever did. That's all we know how to do. Just wherever you are, wherever you go, we would do kirtan. So what was happening in India at that time is that beggars would do kirtan in that time in India. You go on the train, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. And so people related kirtan with begging. And they were telling that to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, stop it. Don't do public kirtan. Because people misunderstand. So, time, place, circumstance. I'm in Israel. I was in Israel. Not that I'm in it, but I visit there. And in one temple, they don't do public kirtan because they say people misunderstand it. So they do kirtans at events. And they do very nice musical kirtans. But they say, if they do, big wild kirtans in the street and people just think they're a cult and it could be problematic. Whether that's true or not is debatable, but that was their experience. So when they do kirtan, it's done that way. So, time, place, circumstance. I like to do kirtan in public, nice with musicians, do it really nice. Sit down, people appreciate it, give them a good experience. So, but in some places, rowdy, jumping up and down, screaming is good also. People like that. We used to do an event in America. It was a big street festival. And we would do kirtan with guitars, keyboards, drum machines, bass. And everybody at the festival would be drinking beer. You have festivals like that? I mean, that's the festival. Right? The beer is the festival, the other stuff is just a side attraction. So by 4 in the afternoon, when the beer was taking effect, a lot of people would stop and chant and dance with us at the kirtan, because we had like the rock and roll music. So it worked. That's what we did. We had a lot of people chanting. Every situation is different, but for us, as the people doing the kirtan, we get a lot of benefit because we're giving the holy name to a lot of people, and Krishna really reciprocates. We get immersed. I was doing a Japa workshop, and one devotee raised his hand, and he said he goes out on the street every day, because in Toronto, where the temple is, you can walk downtown. It's very close, so they can walk in like 10 minutes. They can walk downtown and just meet people. So he would go downtown almost every day, and he would have mantra cards, and he'd distribute books, and even if he just meet people, he'd give them a card and chant Hare Krishna. He said, whenever I would give out, any day I'd go out and give out mantra cards and ask people to chant, my japa was always good the next day. So it's like, you give and you get. So that's interesting. Right? You give Krishna, you get Krishna. So it's something to think about. What else?
And you made the point about if you chant 16 good rounds, you could actually better than 100 rounds. In the same way, could you say that if you chanted less rounds, then it is better than
Wrong. Is 4 good rounds better than 16 bad rounds? Depends if you're initiated or not. My personal experience is that if you chant 4 really good rounds, you'll be more surcharged and will be more spiritually surcharged and purified than if you chant 16 bad rounds. I think everyone has that experience. Even 1 good round. You ever chant 1 really good round? Really enlivened, and you chant 16 bad rounds? You ever chant 16 bad rounds and you don't really feel any different? Because that's my experience. If I don't chant good rounds, I almost feel like I didn't chant. So I would say, like Bhaktivinoda Thakur said, he said, chant the name once. What he meant is chant the pure name. If you could chant Krishna's name purely once, you would get love of Krishna. So that one pure name is better than 100,000 million offensive names, right? But the problem is, at least if you're initiated or want to be initiated, or live in a temple, you promise to chant 16 rounds. So you also have the vow part of it. So even if they're bad, you'll get the benefit of the 4 good. You may not get much benefit of the 12 bad, but at least you did your vow. So, does that make sense? This is my experience. And Prabhupada was giving a lecture, and he was talking about mechanical chanting. And he said he was imitating, poor chant, Nishna, he was actually making fun like that. And he said, if you chant like that, then you won't get the goal, because the goal is to love Krishna, and you only get Krishna if you chant pure names. So he said, in so many words, politely and kind of subtly, he was saying that those 16 rounds are pretty useless. In the sense, you're not going to get love of Krishna chanting that way. You have to at least come to the offenseless stage. So then if you're in the offenseless stage, then there's an opportunity to come to the pure stage. Because first you have to come to the offenseless stage. So that's what he said in his lecture. He said, but at least you're chanting your 16 rounds that you vowed to chant. You just won't get love of God that way, but at least you're following your spiritual master. So the goal is 16 good rounds. If you can't do 16 good, at least 12 or 8 or 4 or 1 mantra. But 16 bad rounds is not the goal. It really isn't. And a lot of devotees a lot of devotees think I just have to chant 16 rounds. Somehow or other get them done on the tube, driving, internet, or just, get them done, whatever. Listen to the radio channel. Just get it done. But if you actually meditate on it, I mean, imagine you're initiating a devotee. You're the guru. And they come to you and you say, what are the principles? This is the way Prabhupada did it. He said, what are the principles? And they would say the principles. And then Prabhupada would ask them, and how many rounds? And if they said 16, then probably would say minimum, or he would say at least, just because that's the vow. 16 minimum, right? Now imagine you're the spiritual master, and the disciple says 16 rounds. Are you thinking 16 rounds driving are okay? 16 rounds on the internet, 16 rounds on Facebook, 16 rounds watching television? No, Prabhu, I don't chant when I watch television. During the shows, I never chant. One devotee said, I don't chant when I watch. In America, we have the Super Bowl. Here you have the what? What's the big game here? The World Cup. You have the America, we have the Super Bowl. You have the World Cup. So some devotees watch the Super Bowl. Because, you know, and I sometimes Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Go, go, go. Seriously, things are not that great all over ISKCON. So one devotee at a Japa workshop, he said, no way, I don't chant watching the Super Bowl. He said, I just chant during the commercials. So these things are going on, right? So imagine you're initiating. You're not thinking this devotee's going to chant during the commercials and, you know, watch television, watch sports. You're not thinking they're vowing to chant 16 rounds while they drive, or 16 rounds on the phone, or 16 rounds talking, you know, all the things we do. You're probably thinking as a guru that they're vowing to chant 16 good rounds, if they're serious, right? But we, on the other hand, maybe we're not conscious that we're actually vowing to chant 16 good rounds, but that's the vow. Because, you know, the goal isn't just to get the number done, because that's not going to produce the result. That's the point. You know, it's like I joke. I say, gentlemen, would you like to have 16 failed businesses? Who would like 16 failed businesses? Ladies, would you like to have 16 bad husbands? How about 16 million counterfeit dollars? So it's not the number, it's the quality, right? How about the temple has 16 vans that don't work? We're very proud. We own 16 vans. Do any of them work? No. I'm very proud. I chant 16 rounds. Did any of those rounds work? No, but I chant 16 rounds. It's not the goal just to do the number. The goal of the number is the vow you've made. You know, you've made the vow, so you have to do it. But the goal is not, the vow is really not 16 bad rounds. It's 16 good rounds. Because the 16 bad rounds, at least if you chant 16 bad rounds, there's hope someday you'll chant 16 good rounds. So we don't say, we'll just stop chanting until you get your act together. You know, you keep chanting. Right? Because there's hope you'll improve. But the thing is, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he said something. If you're chanting offensively, you're not chanting well. You know, we always hear you should keep chanting, but he said chant in remorse. Chant in remorse. He said you should chant in remorse that you committed offenses to the holy name. So when you're chanting, you're asking the name to forgive you. So that's how you improve. So if you find yourself not chanting well, then go into a mood of remorse and ask the holy name, please forgive me for not chanting properly. Forgive me for committing offenses. That's the way to chant. It's really nice to chant like that. Krishna, forgive me for committing offenses, because it puts you in the consciousness not to commit any offenses when you chant. So now, here's the problem. The problem is we're all busy. When I grew up, people weren't so busy. When I grew up, my mother never worked. My father went to work about 9 o'clock and came home at 5. And he was the only one who had to work and support his family. And everyone in America, when I grew up, only the husband worked. You could have a job in a factory and you could own a home and 2 cars and support a family. That was the economy in America when I grew up. Now, you have to work, your wife has to work, your kids have to work part-time, you still can't pay your mortgage, right? And you're working longer, right? So that makes it more difficult to find that time to chant. So it's a real challenge. So that's why we end up in this just get the rounds done, because we're so... So when you when you want to chant 16 nice rounds, you have to be able to organize your life so you can do it. Right? And then what happens if you don't get up early? Then it's more difficult, right? So, when I was a young devotee, everyone lived in the temple or across the street from the temple. So and everyone was engaged in the mission. So we didn't have this dynamic of people outside in the world trying to fit their rounds in. This is more of a thing in the last 20 years. It's become more common as the congregation is growing. So it's a different kind of challenge. Our challenge was just to stay awake during Japa period, because we never slept enough. So if you could get your rounds, you could stay awake, and during 16 rounds, that was your basic challenge in the early days of movement. As a young devotee, I only slept 5 hours. If I sat down and counted 10, I'd be asleep. Right? We'd all get in the van, right? To go out on Harinam. Nobody'd be awake. You just pray in the driver. Be awake. Sometimes he would fall asleep also. So that was our challenge. But now the challenge is making the time and creating the environment so you can be in the right consciousness to chant. Because if you don't have the right environment and you don't make the time, you're not in the right consciousness. Then you're rushing to get it done. Right? Just trying to get it. Just got to get it done because I don't have time. So these are the challenges we face now today. But this is one of the most important principles that I teach in my Japa workshops, because I think it's an essential obstacle, is to never think the goal is 16 rounds. Because that becomes a huge obstacle. Because if you just chant 16 rounds, you think you're successful. But as you point out, I think you're asking that question because your experience is 4 good rounds is better than 16 bad. And it's true. So the goal is not the number. And many of us get caught up in thinking, it's just the number. It's not. I mean, it is, but it's not. The goal is to always chant, right? Not 16, the goal is to always chant. Is that all right? So now she's going to chant 4 rounds. And then her authority is going to say, why are you chanting 4 rounds? And Mahatma told me to. I'm never inviting him here again. Anything else? Whatever you always wanted to know about Japa, but you were afraid to ask. Now's your chance. Yes?
What about knowledge and study of Krishna consciousness alongside Japa?
How does that work? Study, knowledge and study. Well, many devotees say, particularly for Japa, hearing Krishna Lila is very powerful because it keeps you more absorbed. As we were saying, the tendency is to be absorbed in what we have to do when we're chanting. So a lot of devotees feel that when they hear more about Krishna Lila, then naturally it energizes and inspires their Japa. Of course, hearing and chanting it's part of the process. It's always powerful. Knowledge is always powerful. But for some devotees, it's more inspiring than for others. Some devotees are more into service. Some are more into hearing Lila. So it depends on taste also. But we should all. Prabhupada wrote his books, so we should study them. We should know them. But japa is really more of a prayer. It's more of the heart than the head. So when you're too much in your head, you lose contact with your heart. And I tend to be a head person, so I used to chant japa in my head, which means I'm very philosophical. I think about philosophy while I chant. But I wasn't connected with the meaning of the name, because I was just like philosophical analysis while chanting. And that's not, japa it's a prayer, so it's meant to be an opening of the heart. Krishna, please engage me in your service. Krishna, please accept me. Krishna, please draw me to you. That's the mood of chanting. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he advised, when you're chanting, you should remind yourself of what the Maha Mantra means, because sometimes when you're chanting, you just kind of go into the ozone, so to speak. Like, you lose contact with what it actually means. And so he said, remind yourself of what it means, and that's hard, because what does it mean? Krishna save me. Krishna deliver me. Krishna help me. That's the meaning of it. So yes, knowledge is always good, but when you're chanting, it's the heart, it's the lila, it's the form, it's the qualities of Krishna that inspire them. It's because chanting is connection. It's rasa. Krishna's there, you're there. You're both there. That means there's rasa going on during japa. Did you know that? Like, we think, well, by chanting Hare Krishna, when I become pure, it'll awaken my relationship. That's how we generally understand it, and that's true. But the reality is, if Krishna's in His name and you're there and you're chanting, the relationship is already there. So chanting is also a relationship. It's not like the relationship comes later. The relationship will manifest fully later, but there's still a relationship. So that's the mood of chanting. And that's how you get absorbed. Now, people always have the question, how do you control your mind when you chant? And Bhaktivinoda Thakur said an interesting thing. He said, you can't. So no one has to try. Everyone's relieved. He said, you do it by Krishna's mercy. Not that you don't have to. But my personal experience is that when you're chanting from your heart, then your mind calms down. And when you're not chanting from your heart, your mind activates. Like imagine you go in front of the deities and you're praying. Like Prabhupada used to pray, Krishna, I pray that I won't fall into Maya. So imagine you're in front of the deities and you're praying, Radha Go Kulanandas, I pray you save me, I pray. I don't fall into Maya. That's all heart, right? It's all coming from your heart. So your mind is not a problem. When your heart's there, you're not battling with your mind when you're praying. But when you lose that mode of prayer, then you battle with your mind. Because then you go into your head, and the mind has a process of thinking. It just recycles the same thoughts. So we're very habituated to a certain way of thinking. It's very easy to think that way. Most devotees, it's like when they put their hand on their first beat and start chanting, it's like it activates their mind. It's crazy, right? But what really should be activated is the heart. As soon as you put your hand on your beat, your head should just go, your mind should go, and your heart should start activating. So that's the problem. So what I teach in my Japa workshops are processes and ways to activate the heart, so it starts to become a habit. So when you just, this association of just touching the bead activates your heart and activates this feeling of fortune. I'm so fortunate to be able to chant. I'm so happy to chant. I love to chant. It activates that mood. But if we're not in the right mood, then you put that bead in your hand, it activates another mood. And what is the mood it activates? I don't really want to do this. This is going to be difficult. Maybe I can chant faster and get it over with. Many of you don't realize it. But if you're chanting on a daily basis is not good, then every morning when you put your hands on your beads, it's going to remind you of the bad experiences you had. And it's going to reinforce this, oh no, I have to do this again. I don't really want to do it. I have to do this again because the experiences are bad. Whereas if you upgrade your japa, so to speak, so that you're relishing it and it's a period of prayer and devotion, then when you touch that bead, it activates very positive emotions because you like chanting, you want to do it. So what I try to do in my workshops is help devotees develop all the proper attitudes so that when they sit down to chant, just by touching the bead, the first bead, it's a positive experience. It's not, well, I have to chant 8 rounds before my mind comes down. No, immediately. You're like present. Just like we all know, if you do deity worship, it doesn't take time to really get into it. It's like you pretty much get into it quite quickly, right? It's Krishna, he's in the deity. This is serious, right? It's not like it takes you an hour before and now I realize I'm doing deity worship. You get into it right away. So it should be that way with japa. It'd be nice, wouldn't it? If that was your japa. So anyway, I'm just speaking from my own realization. And the courses I teach are based heavily on my own realization, because as a teacher, I try to practice these things so that I can teach from realization. And I have this amazing experience. It's so interesting. I had given a Japa workshop in Calcutta, and then I was going back to Mayapur with one of the students from the workshop, and I had a book by my godbrother called Japa, what was it called?
Like Lord Japa.
No, it's by Dhanadhar Swami, Japa something. It's a little blue book. Anyway, it's a blue book about Japa, and what he did in the book, part of it was his own realization, another part was just interviews with devotees. And as I was saying, as a teacher, the way I personally teach is I read things, I study things, I absorb it, I practice it, and then when it comes out through my realization. So a lot of what I teach, I don't always say it's right here in this book, but it's things I read and put together, and I say, this is what I realize, this is how I do it. And I test it with devotees, and if it works, if it's positive, then I employ it. So we were reading this book, Japa Meditations, yeah. That little blue book? Yeah. Japa Meditations. So he has his realizations in the book, and he has interviews with different devotees. So we were reading the interviews. Radhanath Swami, Niranjana Swami, this Swami, that Swami, and also younger devotees. And we're reading the exact same things that I taught in the course, and I didn't get them from that book. These devotees' realizations. And I was looking to the devotee, I say, isn't that exactly what I taught? And he'd read it. He said, word for word, that's what you taught. And I said, I didn't get it from that book. So it was so nice to realize that when the Holy Name reveals himself to you, he reveals himself to everybody in the same way. And everyone is having this beautiful experience. And all the theme in that, one of the biggest themes in that book is chant from your heart. It's feeling. That's the proper name. Come up again and again and again. And then Niranjana Swami said, even if the feeling is negative, that I'm fallen, I'm lowly, Krishna, I need your help, just go with that feeling, because it's feeling. And that's what japa is, it's about feeling. So even if you're feeling, Krishna, I'm useless, or Krishna, I don't have any taste for the holy name, you use that feeling to beg for a taste or to be dependent, because it's all about bringing feelings. So it was really sweet reading that book. What was the question?
Relationship with japa and knowledge.
Japa and knowledge, yeah. So japa is it's a really activity of the heart. And in the purport of the prayer of Queen Kunti, when she said, you can't utter, Janmai Shraya Shuddha Shubir, you can't utter Krishna's name unless you have feeling. And Prabhupada said, everything depends on feeling in the purport. It's all about feeling. Because that's what bhakti is, right? I mean, not that you just feel and you sit on the couch all day, but you act, but it's the consciousness with which you act. I was actually attending a course on the Jaiva Dharma. The Jaiva Dharma is an incredibly analytical book about the science of bhakti. And one of the things you find in the Jaiva Dharma that pure devotional service, it's such an accessible stage that we can everyone in this room could do pure devotional service just by being willing to serve Krishna just to please him. From any stage, wherever you are in Krishna consciousness, if you just serve Krishna to please him, that's pure devotional service. So in that conception, we can even chant Shuddha Nam, a pure name, just by chanting to please Krishna without wanting anything. That's considered pure chanting. Like maybe the lower level, but in a broad sense, that's pure chanting. That's Shuddha Nam. We can all chant Shuddha Nam just to please Krishna, if that's our desire. So that's nice. And that's what bhakti's about, right? Isn't it? That's the main thing. I joke with Indians. I say, You go to the temple, I don't know if you do this here, but you go to the temple in India and you can buy a plate, right, with a banana, coconut, incense, flowers, right? It's not expensive, is it? 20 rupees or something? What's 20 rupees? 5 pies? 5 pence? 8 pence or something? It's not very much. So I joke with them, so I say, you go to the deity and you bribe God with a banana, incense, a coconut. You know, you pay 20 rupees to bribe God, you know, he'll give me 100,000, you know, rupees in exchange. So that's not bhakti. You know. Bhakti is all about the feeling, about the devotion, the mood. Right? So we take the same banana, the same coconut, the same thing, but the mood, the banana and the coconut, it's a medium, right? It's just a medium to express devotion, or it's a medium for other people to express their desire to kind of try to cheat God. That's a great deal. You invest 20 rupees and get back 100,000. Good investment, right? Yeah, so people say, well, if I'm going to invest, I might as well invest in God. 20 rupees and ask him for 100,000. But a devotee invests his devotion. He doesn't. So it's the same banana, right? And the banana is just the medium, right, to express your devotion. It's not that Krishna needs your banana. He gets a lot of bananas in India. So he doesn't need your banana. He gets a lot of really cheap incense. So, anything else? Yes? Ladies first. You know what Prabhupada said? When you serve prasadam, ladies and children first. I guess nobody heard that instruction in this country. He said that, yes.
No, people who don't follow four effective principles, is it appropriate for them to chant?
People aren't following.
Four regulated principles.
Yeah, a very good question. People aren't chanting. People aren't following the four regulated principles. Should they chant? Yes. Since it's the only way you'll ever get to the position of following the regulated principles.
According to the 10 principles, chanting and causing sinful activities.
Oh yeah. Okay, let me explain it. So, it's an offense to commit sin on the strength of chanting. Now, the first thing to understand is anytime a devotee had difficulty, like major difficulty, an advanced devotee had major difficulty, Prabhupada didn't say, okay, you had difficulty, so stop your devotional service. Stop chanting. You were a sannyasi, you fell down, you went away with another woman, you stole money from the temple, you did all these things. Stop chanting. Don't go to the temple. Don't see the deity. Don't read my books. You think that would be kind of strange if Prabhupada said that, right? He would always say, what would he say? The opposite. Come to the temple, come back, keep chanting, I'll engage you in service. Why? Because it's the only way you'll ever be purified. So, committing sin on the strength of chanting is different than committing sin. Because committing sin on the strength of chanting means you are purposely committing a sin with the intention of being removed, with the intention of not suffering the reaction to that sin by chanting Hare Krishna. No. If you accidentally commit a sin and you say, Krishna, I did this, and if you want to punish me, but I want to be a devotee and I'm going to keep chanting and so on, and I want you. That's different. Because sometimes we can't avoid sin. Right? Now, there's another interesting thing. This might get me kicked out of Leicester also. I may not be giving class tomorrow. But if you study carefully, well, let me say another thing. This is really important. Sin is not such a bad thing. Sin won't ruin your devotional service. Offending devotees will ruin your devotional service. It's much worse. Because all your sin can be wiped out with one chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra. It's gone. But if you offend a devotee, you offend the holy name, you're going to be chanting a long time. You're going to be asking for forgiveness a long time. So offenses to the name, to the deity, to the Dham, to Vaishnavas, this is much more detrimental than sin. Sin not such a big thing. So in the Jaiva Dharma, Bhaktivinoda Thakur says it's committing namaparad is worse than sin because it's hard to overcome namaparad. It takes a lot of chanting to overcome namaparad. If we commit offenses all the time, then we have to keep chanting for years to overcome it. But if you commit a sin, just chant one mantra. Chant one name. Krishna, sin is gone. Right? So that's important to understand. Now, here's the thing that's going to get me kicked out of Leicester. Well, you're either going to love me or you're. And most of you will love me for this, because you relieve your anxiety. But you may not think it's our philosophy, but it is. So, there are 4 regulative principles. And I think the 2 most difficult are probably drinking tea for most people and illicit sex, right? Is that it? For most people. For most people who come to ISKCON, the alcohol and drugs are, and sometimes it's a problem, but generally not. Because if they're really into alcohol and drugs, they don't get that far. So it's usually the tea, right, for Indians. The British, Prophet talks about how the British got the Indians addicted to tea. And made a huge business. You know. If you can get somebody addicted to something, it's a great business, right? Because not everybody needs it. So, I don't know who got the British addicted to tea, but they got the Indians addicted to tea. So sometimes people come to ISKCON and say, yeah, I can follow the principles, but this tea is a problem. It happens, I've seen it. So, cigarettes, tea, and illicit sex. Now, what does illicit sex mean? That's a very interesting discussion. If you study in depth Prabhupada's instructions about illicit sex, you will find there are various standards and definitions of what it means. So generally, devotees would think, if I'm married, I should only have sex to have children, and I should do that after chanting 50 rounds. That's a standard. And anything else besides that is illicit sex. But if you look at Prabhupada's definitions, there's a continuum from what's the lowest standard to what's the highest standard. So that's the highest standard, if you can do that. Now, it's very easy to do that if you don't like your wife, because you'll never get close enough to have illicit sex. So, if you want to be purely celibate in marriage, find someone you just can't stand and marry them, but you'll never get close enough to have illicit sex, and you'll have no problem. Right? This is actually one of the ISKCON counselors. She said, who can strictly follow this principle? She said, well, in my experience of counseling devotees, the married couples that hate one another, they follow this principle very well. And she said, and very, very advanced, staunch devotees, they follow this principle. But she said, for everybody else, they kind of fall somewhere, not that, someone may just slip once in a while. It's just human nature. So Prabhupada said, the bottom line is no illicit sex means no sex outside of marriage. If you're going to have sex, you're married. Right? So, if you want to touch the deity, you have to be second initiated, right? Brahmin initiated, right? And if you're a man and you want to touch a woman, you have to be married. It's the same idea. You can't touch the deity if you're not a Brahmin, and you can't touch a woman if you're not married, right? So now, how much will you touch or not touch? That's the continuum. So sometimes devotees slip. They think, oh, I'm rotten and horrible. But that's a broader definition of no illicit sex. At least you're married, and at least you're taking care of your kids. So it's not the end of the world. And usually, as you progress in devotional service, you become more detached. So if you can't do it when you're young, you do it. You gradually do it. Now, with that, am I still okay in ISKCON after saying that? Somebody get the hook and pull. No, everybody's really happy. They're going to go home tonight with their wives and enjoy. No, that's not. It's not like, okay, now I have a license. No, it's just a very broad definition. The no illicit sex in the broadest sense means you don't have sex outside marriage. You have sex, you're responsible. You have children, you do it in marriage. Now, the highest standard is a Brahminical standard. So we're trying to create a Brahminical culture. That's what we're trying to do, create a culture of Brahminical. So a high Brahminical culture is you do it only to have children. And that's the standard. And that's the standard we're trying to come to. But if you can't come to it all the time perfectly, don't kill yourself. and keep chanting. There's hope. So you're still following no illicit sex, just a lower standard of it. And you know this is the highest standard. Is that all right? Now, this has been discussed amongst many senior devotees in just dealing with the reality of how difficult it is to perfectly follow this principle. I was with Jayadvaita Swami, he's here now, and we were talking about this. He said, well, I just decided I'll never get married, because if I got married, I would just fall on my face. So, and his humility, he's saying that. I'll just remain a brahmachari, no problem. So it is obviously a problem when you're married. It's a challenge, right? So anyway, we don't get into the minute details of this, but this is just reality, and we deal with it. And another interesting thing is that you have varnashram. So people, what varna am I in? Oh, Prabhu, you're a shudra. You don't call me a shudra. Get a big argument. Who do you think you are? So, in ISKCON, we're all following Brahminical culture. So it doesn't matter what job we have, but our culture is Brahminical, right? So you may be a shudra. What does shudra mean? Shudras are the guys that sit in front of computers and find bugs in software, right? Those are shudras. Shudras work for people. The guys, the top students in India from IT, the brains of India who program software are shudras, generally. It's just an occupation. Brahmacharis and varnaprasts and sannyasis have no varna because they don't work. So it's just how you work. That's your varna. If you don't work, you don't have a varna. So what's your varna? You're a teacher. Hey, I'm a teacher. You're a shudra. Am I better than you? No, this is my job. It's what I do. So I'm a Brahminical occupation. But aside from occupation, we have a Brahminical culture. We're all Brahmins. This is our culture. Ramananda Roy was a Shudra. What does that mean? He was a Shudra. I don't understand. No, just he was an administrator. That was considered in Varna. That was a Shudra. But as far as everything else, he's a pure devotee. So we have Brahminical culture. We're all Brahmins by culture, even if we're not initiated. It's Brahminical culture. So in that the four regular principles are part of Brahminical culture. And the more you want to be Brahminical, the higher you go up. So for some people can do it right away, some will take longer. Is that all right? Now you have a question.
I know before you were speaking about how to prioritize the japa. Most devotees try and fit it in their schedule. The question was really about the family structure. 20, 30 years ago, there was a whole extended family, but now it's just the husband, the wife, and the children. In terms of specifically for the mother, where the father's outside, working all day long, the kids at home, pretty much 18 hours away.
Right.
How does the mother? Because obviously,
how does the mother chant her rounds? What's the? This question comes up at every japa retreat. Giraj Swami said, I don't know, Prabhupada said this, I can't remember what he quoted. He said, mothers get special mercy. Because it's a huge problem, because the mothers have a hard time finishing their rounds. That's the reality, right? And so, one of the things I suggest, I don't know if it's possible for everyone, is get a babysitter for 2 hours. It's not hard if you live in India, because it only costs you for 2 hours. 2 hours in Mayapur, a babysitter costs you 40 rupees. It's a good deal, right? Yeah, you could pick up someone who could come and watch your kids for 40 rupees for 2 hours. That would be cool. You could start a company, Japa assistants. Japa mother assistants. I don't know if it's practical for everyone, but if it is, in any way practical that someone could do that. Otherwise, it's a difficult question, because Prabhupada was so strict about 16 rounds. I mean, he was heavy, heavy, heavy. I was in Vancouver in 1970, 71, and one lady was pregnant, and she was prematurely pregnant. She was really weak, and she was having a really hard time chanting her rounds, and her husband wrote Prabhupada. He said, is there any way she could make them up later? And he said, no, she has to chant them every day. It's really heavy. And then one of my godbrothers wasn't finishing his rounds because he was very busy. They were refurbishing the temple, and he was only sleeping 4 hours. And Prabhupada finally came to the temple, and so Prabhupada, when he got to the temple, he said, is there anyone not chanting their rounds? And he raised his hand. And Prabhupada said, why are you not chanting your rounds? He said, Prabhupada, we're refurbishing the temple, I'm very busy. I'm only sleeping 4 hours. And who knows what Prabhupada said? Yeah, sleep too, sleep less. So now, whether Prabhupada meant that strictly or that was just a principle because he knew if he just said, well, that's okay, you don't have to chant 16 rounds, then everyone in the movement would stop chanting 16 rounds. I think you could make that argument. So I think the reality is for some women who are in that situation, during that time, it's going to be a challenge. And if you can't get a babysitter, just Krishna understands. And when you retire, just keep track of all those hundreds of rounds you have left. And when you retire to Vrindavan, just 64 rounds a day, you know, in a month, that's 1,800 rounds. That ought to make it up, right? I don't know what else to say because it's a reality. Now, I have godbrothers who told me their wives never missed their 16 rounds even though. So it depends, you know, what the situation is and the determination and the kind of kids you have. Kids that will actually sleep at night. So, do they do that anymore? They sleep at night? Prabhupada never addressed that question. He just, you know, he was very strict, but it's a reality people have to deal with. I don't think there's any other good excuse other than having a lot of young kids. Even one young kid, it's hard to do it. But I don't know if Prabhupada would accept it. But it seems to be a reality that some women just can't do it. Especially if they have a lot of young kids. So just keep track of all the rounds you miss. And someday, you know, go on a Japa marathon. Make them up. I don't know what else to say. Anyone else have any suggestions? I like the babysitter if you can afford it. Yes.
Once I asked the same question to the devotee now we did not when I was 15. And they said to me that Prabhupada said if you do a devotional service, it's the same as chanting. I don't know if that was true.
To do it is the same. That's true.
Yeah, eating prasad is
It's absolute. That's true.
maybe because of the consciousness.
But the trouble is, if you're initiated, then it's you've made a vow to do that specific service. My
Dressing them and cooking, just totally,
but 16 rounds is first. There's a letter. Prabhupada said 16 rounds first, then other things. So for devotees in general, it's 16 rounds. But you know, you have kids. There's extenuating circumstances you can't control. And another thing, in answer to your question, you were talking about family. I think it's also important that you don't allow your vow to chant 16 rounds to interfere with the relationship you have with your children. Because if your children want to be with you and you say, I can't be with you because I'm chanting, and that becomes a regular affair, they're just going to create a very bad negative samskar towards chanting. Because I think that the chanting was the thing that always got in the way. In the early days of ISKCON, if you were bad, they'd make you chant japa. So then japa was associated with punishment. And so a lot of the young kids developed a very negative attitude towards japa, because that's how they were punished. So they don't want to chant. Weird, isn't it? the strange world of Hare Krishna. Yes.
What about if somebody's health is really bad, or somebody's suffering like memory loss and things like that? Is there devotees there, most of their life? I mean, how does that work?
Well, it's like Takaharidas, at the end of his life, he couldn't finish his rounds. And Mahaprabhu came to him and said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "I can't finish." And he said, "You don't have to." So, if you can't, what can you do? But at that point, he was getting ready to leave his body. Mahaprabhu said, "No, you don't need to. You're already perfect. And you chant within your mind, within your heart, whatever you can do. Because Krishna ultimately knows your mood. So it's not about rules and regulations, it's about your heart. So you do your best. Like, it's really interesting, In different countries, they pronounce the Maha Mantra differently. And some of the Chinese, they can't say R, so they say L. So that, technically, they're not actually chanting Hare Krishna. They're chanting some other mantra. Or, how do the Italians say Hare Krishna? How do they say Hare Krishna? Hare Krishna, or something like that. In Spain, Hare Krishna. And I don't know in Spain, but in South America, they don't say Hare Krishna, they say Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. So it's enemy Krishna. Hare is enemy. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. So how are you going to make advancement chanting enemy Krishna, enemy Radha? Right? So they're not, technically not even chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. But Prabhupada said that Krishna understands what you're trying to do. So even though we say the pure holy name purifies you, but it's the heart, it's the intention. So it's very interesting that Prabhupada said that. That even you're not really actually even chanting the Maha Mantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Not even Hale Krishna, Hale Lama. You're not even chanting the Maha Mantra, but you are chanting because Krishna knows you're chanting. So Krishna makes up for it. And Prabhupada gave the Gayatri mantra to Jayananda. Jayananda couldn't say the Sanskrit properly. And at a certain point, Prabhupada just laughed. He said, "It's useless. He'll never do it." He said, "But Krishna understands your heart." So So if physically we can't do it, then Krishna understands our heart. Krishna's not a tyrant.
You didn't chant 16 rounds.
I've got a special place in hell. We don't chant 16 rounds. We need a vow.
It's the worst part of hell.
No, it's not like that. There was one senior devotee, sannyasi. He wasn't chanting his rounds. Prabhupada, he's not chanting his rounds. Prabhupada said, "I cannot tell him, you tell him." But Prabhupada engaged him. He let him do service. So, Prabhupada was tolerant. So, we have our ups and downs. And we just go on somehow or other. But, Prabhupada said 16 minimum. He didn't want us to go less. That's important. You get mercy at 16. If you can do it.
I just want to share one chanting
Yes.
realization with. I go door to door to preach, and I came across this person who used to do a lot of service in the temple, but now his age was bedridden. He couldn't speak, but he can hear.
Oh.
He can hear. So I gave him Prabhupada's chanting CD. I asked his wife to play this 24/7, and she did. And he left the body while hearing Prabhupada's chanting.
Nice.
Yeah. So we in that case, what the Mataji asked, when we have frail body, we can't chant. At least
Yeah. Perfect. Krishna understands. I don't want to get initiated because I might go to that hell. For those who don't chant 16 rounds. No. Okay? Is that long enough? Or too long? Should we stop? Everybody's hungry? No? I heard a story, Radhanath Swami did a yatra, and it was 4 o'clock and they hadn't eaten anything yet. And they were just absorbed in hearing about Krishna. So Maharaj said, who wants to eat? Anybody want to eat? Nobody raised their hand. Except one devotee, one sannyasa, said, I want to eat. He told us that story. He said, I think I was the only honest person in that audience. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Premanande. So, we just had a special event today where we produced some CDs of the Japa retreats. And I brought them with me if any of you would like some CDs of the Japa retreats. And I have some other CDs of other retreats and workshops that I just produced and I brought from India. But I couldn't produce the Japa workshop CD, and by the grace of these wonderful devotees, we were able to produce this Japa CD. So if any of you would like to purchase, I don't know how much to sell it for, so just give a donation. And we also have another CD called Everything Mahatma. If you like, you know this devotee Mahatma, he chants Brahma Samhita? You know, you've heard that? Chintamani Pakarasham. How many have heard that? Govindamadi Bhusham. That's me, in case you didn't know. I thought it was famous, but now I find when I travel around ISKCON, people say, is that you? The chance that I thought everybody knew it was me. So now I have to go tell everybody, hey, that was me. So we have that song and 13 hours of other music on one CD, if you'd like it. So we brought that just because people tend to ask me, do you have your music? So I brought it, if you like it. And these two young ladies will somehow figure out where to put them and take care of them. So what do we do now? We eat or have kirtan? We do both. Prasadam ready? 5-minute kirtan? No.
Yeah.
5-minute kirtan. We'll sign off on Mayapur TV. Or maybe we'll not sign off. I don't know.